What happens when a rich developer shames a poor widow by soaking her last hope in water? Anton thought her corn was worthless, but a silent stranger in white was watching. What he said next made the entire restaurant freeze in silence. In a busy roadside eatery in Pangasinan, Aling Rosa, a widow in her 60s, carefully placed a small woven basket on the counter. Inside were 12 ears of organic white corn, her only hope to buy medicine for her grandson's high fever. She needed 500 pesos urgently. Standing right behind her was Anton, a 28-year-old real estate developer wearing a heavy gold watch that cost more than Rosa's entire wooden house. Anton grew impatient with the delay. He grabbed a bottle of expensive mineral water, twisted the cap, and poured it directly over Rosa's basket, soaking every ear of corn. "Your corn is worthless, old woman," he shouted so the whole restaurant could hear him. "This isn't a wet market for peasants. It is a place for people who actually have money. Get this trash out of my sight right now." Rosa stood frozen as her old cardigan began dripping. She clutched the soaked basket while the other diners looked down at their plates in heavy silence. She felt the crushing weight of 40 years of hard work turning into complete public invisibility in a single moment. Is it possible that the most valuable things we offer are often seen as worthless by the world? The air in the eatery grew thick with the smell of damp earth and unwashed shame. Anton sneered, adjusting his silk shirt, while Rosa's hands trembled against the plastic counter. She looked at her corn, now glistening with wasted water, and felt a familiar ache in her chest. This was the silent pain of a woman who had once owned land but now owned nothing but her dignity. But as the crowd turned away, a man in a simple white shirt stepped from the shadows of the corner table. His face was weathered by the sun, and his eyes held a peace that seemed to still the room. He did not shout, yet everyone felt his presence. Everything is about to change for Aling Rosa, and the truth will soon be revealed. If you believe that God sees the tears of the humble and brings justice to the brokenhearted, please support this story by liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Why do we often judge a person's worth by what they have instead of who they are? Before the heavy debts piled up like stones on her chest, Rosa's life followed a strict and holy rhythm. For 30 years, she and her late husband Cardo managed a small poultry farm in the green heart of Pangasinan. Every single morning at 5:30, they were already out in the fields, breathing the scent of damp earth. Rosa kept a rusted tin box hidden under their wooden bed, organized with every single receipt and land tax payment. Every birth certificate was filed by year with a blue pen. It was not a life of gold and jewelry, but it was a life of perfect order. Their small home always smelled of dried tobacco and fresh jasmine flowers. It was a sanctuary built on calloused hands and a deep belief in fairness. They believed that if you were honest, the world would be fair to you in return. The collapse began in the year 2017 with a sudden bird flu outbreak. It wiped out their entire flock of chickens in only 3 weeks. Then came Cardo's terrible lung infection that stole his breath and his strength. By 2018, the hospital bills had reached 850,000 pesos. Rosa had to sell the farm, then the old delivery jeep, and finally their small plot of land. When Cardo passed away, the bank took the house where they had raised their children. In the chaotic rush of moving to a shanty in the city,
Her tin box was lost. That box was the archive of her entire identity and her dignity.
By 2019, her daughter moved to Manila to work as a maid, leaving Rosa alone. She was left with a sick grandson and no papers to prove she was once a woman of standing. Rosa's life became a grey blur of survival in the humid heat of the town. She still woke up at 5:30 out of habit, but now she had no fields to tend. She spent her long days cleaning fish at the port for only 150 pesos. Sometimes she gathered leftover vegetables from the mud to sell for a few coins. The memories of her husband's smiling face began to fade like an old photograph in the sun. Her prayers became mechanical whispers that felt like they never reached the ceiling. She reached a point of total exhaustion where she did not even feel the sharp pain anymore. She was just a ghost moving through the streets, waiting for the long day to finally end. The man in the simple white shirt watched her from the counter of the eatery. He saw the way she touched her empty pockets, looking for a reality that had been stolen. Anton laughed again, tossing a wet coin onto the floor near her feet. "Pick it up, old woman. It is more than your life is worth," he mocked. Rosa looked at the coin in the dirt and then at her ruined corn. The stranger stepped closer and the air suddenly felt cooler, as if a storm was passing. He placed a firm hand on the counter and the loud music in the eatery suddenly cut to silence. "A person's history is not written in bank books, but in the dust of their faithful work," the man said. His voice was low, but it echoed like thunder in the small room. The truth about Rosa's past is about to collide with Anton's pride in a way no one expects. If you believe that no act of faith is ever truly lost in the eyes of God, like this video. Subscribe to our channel to see how the Lord restores what the years have stolen. The silence in the eatery was so deep, you could hear the distant humming of a refrigerator. The man in the simple white shirt did not move. He stood there with hands that looked like they had carved mountains and planted seeds. Anton let out a sharp, nervous laugh, trying to regain his control. "Who are you to talk about history? You look like you don't have a single peso in your pocket," Anton sneered. He stepped closer to the stranger, his gold watch catching the dim light. "This old woman is a nobody. Her corn is trash, and her life is a series of failures. That is the only truth here." The stranger did not blink. He looked at Anton with a gaze that seemed to see every lie he had ever told. "A name written on a piece of paper can be lost," the man said softly. "But a name written in the book of life remains forever. You think her poverty is her identity, but your wealth is only a mask for your fear." Rosa looked from the stranger to Anton. For the first time in years, she felt her back straighten. The stranger's words felt like warm oil being poured over her tired soul. He turned his attention back to Rosa. "The rusted tin box you lost, Rosa," he said, his voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "The one with the blue ink and the careful dates. It is not truly gone. Nothing built on love is ever truly lost." Rosa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How could this traveler know about the box? How could he know about the blue pen she used to label the tax receipts for the farm? It was a secret she had buried with her husband. The stranger reached out and touched a single ear of the wet corn in her basket. As his fingers brushed the grain, the water didn't just dry. It seemed to glow for a brief second. Anton felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He wanted to shout more insults, but his throat felt tight.
He looked at the stranger's sandals, which were dusty from the road, but somehow looked cleaner than his own expensive leather shoes.
"You're just a crazy wanderer," Anton muttered, but his voice lacked its previous fire. He began to back away toward his table. The other customers were now whispering. They weren't looking at Rosa with pity anymore. They were looking at Anton with a strange kind of realization. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. It was no longer a rich man and a beggar. It was a man of shadows standing before a man of light. Rosa felt a sudden surge of peace. She no longer felt the need to hide her dripping cardigan or her calloused hands. She looked at the stranger and saw not just a man, but a mirror reflecting the woman she used to be. "I thought God had forgotten my name," she whispered, her voice cracking. The stranger smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through the monsoon clouds. "He has been counting your every step since 5:30 this morning, Rosa. He was there when you sold the Jeep. He was there when you cried in the dark." The moment of ultimate reckoning is drawing near for everyone in this room. If this story reminds you that the Lord knows your name and your private struggles, support us by liking this video and subscribing. Leave a comment with the word "seen" if you believe God never loses sight of His children. Does our true value come from what we own or from the eyes of the one who created us? One rainy evening, while Rosa sat on a concrete bench near the church, a man in a simple barong sat beside her. He looked like a local clerk, but he spoke with a voice that cut through the sound of the rain. "You still wake up at 5:30 a.m., Rosa," he said quietly. Rosa flinched. The stranger did not look at her with pity, but with a deep, ancient knowing. "You remember the smell of the chicken feed in the morning, and how you used to label every envelope in that tin box with a blue pen." Rosa's breath hitched in her throat. The stranger didn't perform a magic trick. He simply looked at her with such intense recognition that Rosa felt her soul grow warm for the first time in years. "I saw you when you lit that single candle last Sunday and said nothing because you had no words left. I was there in the silence." The man stood up and gestured toward the counter where the wet corn lay. Anton was still frozen, his expensive watch ticking loudly in the quiet eatery. "The world measures a person by what they can buy," that stranger said, turning his gaze toward the rich man. "But heaven measures a person by what they are willing to lose for the sake of love." He placed a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. His touch didn't feel like a miracle from a movie. It felt like the firm, steady support of a son or a brother. The shame that had sat on Rosa's chest for 5 long years began to dissolve. She looked at her soaked basket and no longer saw trash. She saw the sacrifice of her morning, the labor of her hands, and the love for her grandson. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with a quiet authority. Even the owner of the eatery stopped wiping the tables and stood still. The stranger leaned in closer to Rosa. "The papers in your box were proof for the bank, but your faithfulness is proof for the kingdom. Your worthless corn is a treasure that the fires of this world cannot consume." Rosa wiped a tear with her damp sleeve. She realized that while she had been mourning her lost house and her lost farm, she had never actually lost her place in the eyes of the Creator. She was not a ghost. She was a daughter. Something deep within the heart of this story is about to be revealed, showing that no struggle goes unnoticed. If you feel that God is speaking to your heart right now through these words,
Please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel.
Is it possible that our greatest losses are actually the moments when we are most closely held by the divine? They walked to a small, quiet karindaria just a few steps away from the noise. Over 2 bowls of warm, steaming soup, the stranger spoke with a voice that felt like home. "The world thinks you are a failure because you lost your farm and your box of papers, Rosa," he said. He blew gently on his spoon, his movements slow and deliberate. "But your worth was never in the hectares of land or the stamps of a government official. It was in the 5:30 a.m. prayers when no one was watching. It was in the way you held Cardo's hand when the medicine ran out." Rosa looked at her wrinkled hands, the same hands that had been mocked just minutes ago. "Your worthless corn was a holy sacrifice today, Rosa. You were faithful even when you had no strength left. That is not a defeat. That is a victory that the heavens are celebrating." For the first time in many years, Rosa wept. She stopped defending herself against her own shame and realized that her dignity was never something the bank could repossess or Anton could drown. The stranger reached out and placed a small, weathered envelope on the wooden table between them. It looked old, as if it had traveled 1,000 miles through wind and dust. "Go to the municipal office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, he said firmly. "There is a clerical position opening in the records department. They need someone who truly understands the value of an archive. They need someone who knows that behind every paper is a human life." Rosa felt a strange heartbeat of hope. It wasn't the excitement of winning a lottery, but the quiet, steady pulse of a new beginning. She looked at the envelope and then at the man. His eyes were the color of the earth after a fresh rain. "Why me?" she whispered. He smiled, and for a moment, the flickering fluorescent light of the eatery seemed to shine like the sun. "Because you know how to keep things that the world throws away. The weight of our past is finally lifting, but the greatest lesson is yet to come. If this story reminds you that God provides for those who remain faithful in the small things, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel." Can a person's life be restored simply by being seen by the right eyes at the right time? The next morning, the municipal office was crowded with people and the smell of old paper. Rosa stood in the hallway, clutching the weathered envelope the stranger had given her. Before she could even reach the desk, she saw a familiar face across the room. It was Anton. He was there to sign the final papers to demolish the old neighborhood where Rosa's shanty stood. He looked pale, his gold watch glinting under the harsh office lights, but his hands were shaking as he held his leather briefcase. When he saw Rosa, he stopped in his tracks. The arrogance from the eatery had vanished, replaced by a look of confusion and sudden realization. He remembered the man in the white shirt and the words that had echoed like thunder. Rosa did not look away. She walked past him with her head held high, her steps firm and steady. When she reached the head of the records department, she handed over the envelope. The official opened it, and his eyes widened in surprise. Inside was not just a recommendation, but a perfectly preserved copy of Rosa's original land title, stamped and sealed, as if it had never been lost in the move. The stranger had not just given her a job. He had restored the very thing the world had stolen from her. The official looked at Rosa with newfound respect. "We have been looking for these records for years, darling Rosa," he said. "Your knowledge of the old farming boundaries is exactly what we need to stop the illegal land grabs in this province." Anton watched from a distance
as his plans for the demolition began to crumble.
Without the lost records, his legal claim to the land was invalid. The truth had come to light, not through a loud explosion, but through the quiet return of a single envelope. He realized that the worthless woman he had humiliated was now the only one who could verify his documents. The structures of his greed were falling apart because one woman had stayed faithful in the dark. Rosa looked at him, and for a moment their eyes met. She did not feel a need for revenge. She felt only a deep, quiet pity for a man who thought gold was more durable than truth. The moment of truth has finally arrived, and justice is blooming like jasmine after a storm. If this story shows you that God can restore in a moment what was lost for years, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Write the word restored in the comments if you believe that God is working behind the scenes of your life right now. Is it possible that our greatest vindication comes not from fighting our enemies, but from walking in the truth that God has already prepared for us? Rosa sat alone in the quiet office garden, the heavy envelope resting on her lap. The scent of jasmine was thick in the warm afternoon air, just as it had been at the eatery. She closed her eyes and took a long, deep breath. For 5 years, her chest had felt tight, as if she were breathing through a thin straw. Now, the air filled her lungs completely. She remembered the man's weathered face and his simple white shirt. He hadn't used a magic wand to fix her life. He had simply given her back her name and the truth of her past. In the silence, Rosa realized that her struggle wasn't a punishment, but a refining fire. She looked at her hands, still rough and stained from years of cleaning fish. They were the same hands, but they no longer felt like the hands of a beggar. They were the hands of a survivor who had been seen by the king. The public restoration of Aling Rosa was quiet but absolute.
News traveled fast in the small town of Pangasinan. People who had once walked past her in the market now stopped to offer a respectful nod. Even the owner of the roadside eatery arrived at the municipal office to offer a sincere apology. He brought a fresh basket of the finest white corn, not as a charity, but as a gift for a woman of honor. Rosa accepted it with a gentle smile, harboring no bitterness. She knew that the man in the white shirt didn't want her to seek revenge. He wanted her to walk in the light of the truth. Anton's structures of greed had crumbled not because of a miracle, but because his lies could no longer survive in the presence of the documents Rosa now held. Truth has a natural way of dismantling what is built on sand. Rosa began her new job the following Monday. She sat behind a desk, carefully organizing the town's records with the same blue pen she had used years ago. She was no longer invisible. She was the guardian of the town's history. Every evening, she returned to a clean, quiet room where her grandson waited, his fever long gone. She didn't need a mansion or a gold watch to feel rich. She had her dignity, her family, and the memory of a stranger who knew her name when the rest of the world had forgotten it. Her life was a simple, beautiful testimony that even in the middle of daily suffering, the presence of Christ is a steady shield that never fails. The greatest victories are often won in silence, through patience and the courage to keep believing. If this story has touched your soul and reminded you that God is your ultimate defender, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Is it possible that the peace you are looking for is already waiting for you in the simple act of trusting the one who sees everything? Months later, Rosa returned to the same roadside eatery where Anton had humiliated her. She wore a clean, pressed blouse and sat at a table near the window.
When she saw a young street vendor being pushed away by the busy staff, she did not look away. She stood up, bought the boy's entire stock of rice cakes, and sat back down to drink her water in peace. Her life was still simple, and the grey hairs were more numerous. But she walked with the clarity of a woman who knew she was seen. Every Sunday, she still lights a single candle in the church, not to ask for riches or gold, but to thank the one who found her when she was invisible. She realized that the greatest miracle was not the return of her land, but the return of her hope. The moral of Aling Rosa's journey is clear to everyone who knows her story. True dignity is not something that can be poured out like a bottle of water or stolen by a bank. It is a gift from God that remains intact even in our deepest suffering. When we choose patience over revenge and truth over pride, we allow the presence of Christ to build a shield around our hearts. Justice may not always come with the sound of trumpets, but it always arrives through the quiet, steady power of a faithful life. Rosa's story is a reminder that no matter how small you feel, you are never hidden from the eyes of the one who counts every tear and knows every name. If this story reminded you that God sees everything and acts at the perfect time, please support it with a like. Subscribe to our channel and write the word faith in the comments if you also believe in God's quiet justice and His power to restore the broken.